Welcome students to PG Pathshala. This module is for History and Philosophy of Social Work. This module is named Taxonomy of Social Theories, Overview of Practice Perspectives in Social Work, Part 2. I am Dr. Ruchi Sinha. I am a faculty with the Center for Criminology and Justice, Tata Institute of Social Sciences within the School of Social Work. Now, the objectives of this module is to help you understand the social work practice from the functional paradigm. It will enable you to contextualize the social work ideologies to this paradigm and understand how the social work practice is aligned within this paradigm. And you will be given examples from the psychoanalytical and behavioral social work, which largely have been situated within this paradigm. So essentially what I'm hoping is that through this you would be able to take away the various notions of practice from where social work began. Actually, this is the cornerstone for the beginning of social work profession also. So in that sense it is very important. Unless until you don't understand your history, you would not be able to have a firm holding onto where you're going to practice today. So the contents are introduction, what is functionalist perspective, the fixers paradigm, the psychoanalytic tradition in social work, behavioral social work, and finally a small summary. As I've already said, this module explains the fixers paradigm, and it is based upon, as has been shared with you in an earlier module, the key dimensions of analysis, subjective and objective, and regulation and radical change. If you look at the screen now, you have the four paradigms, and towards the lower end of the y-axis, you have the functionalist paradigm. So it's quite clear that it is regulated by the objective and the regulation notions, and that itself will give you clearly where you are located. So one of the sociological paradigms is functionalism, and functionalism essentially aligns itself to consensus building. It focuses on how the society is organized and how social institutions meet the needs of people living collectively. It relies upon an organic analogy of human society like an organism, where it says that the interdependent parts that exist in society basically function for the benefit of the whole. So everyone is collectively working towards a unitary outcome. This is what this paradigm says, and there is a clear analysis of this paradigm with the biological organism, and the highest organism which is supposed to be existing today as far as the scientific knowledge is the human being, and hence the scientific notions of human body and human society align themselves with each other. And thus what you should understand is that the complexity of the various parts, the complexities of the functions, while understood in this paradigm, is not clearly explored. We just rely upon the fact that there is a sum total of the parts towards an outcome that is a whole. So social systems are dissected into their parts. Those parts are basically the institutions, which we know largely as, you can say, the family, the education system, the economy, the polity, and the religion. And these parts are examined how they work together. So obviously, I'm sure, since you're all students, if we take a ready example for you, say tomorrow you have to get married. Marriage is a process, as an institution, but that institution is linked to your identity, it is linked to your religion, it is linked to your social class, it is linked to your social reality. Now, if you take up this actual function of marriage, it is procreation, but that function is linked to a whole other identities or a whole other subparts of institutions, and thus it is assumed that these all will fall together, and the whole function of marriage will be automatically aligned to by individuals. I'm sure you will understand that how this seems to be slightly difficult in today's world. So functionalism in that sense limits its understanding of the individual in the society, and it takes a generalized view of the society. So Burrell's and Morgan's functionalist quadrant has been called fixers by Howe. So if you look at the screen again, the objective and the regulation context believes that the social order needs to be maintained. Here again, I will just repeat myself that society is viewed as a system of interrelated parts functioning for the good of the whole. And as a result, consensus is sold to us as being good for the overall society, wherein subgroups need to sacrifice for the overall well-being of the whole, and hence the notions of sacrifice, adjustment, being together are emphasized in this particular quadrant of practice. So if you look at the screen, fixers, where functionalist was there in the previous figure, here we have fixers. So now you know where it is located and what I'm talking about. Now within the fixers paradigm, this is just to help you, there are, the way they define the problem is the best way to understand how they function. They suggest that most of the problems arise due to personal inadequacy and misfortune, and the failure to perform the assigned roles, say the assigned roles of a student, of a parent, of a child, etc. The problem and the remedy is correcting the defects in the individual. There is nothing else that you need to change. And social work clients, according to this paradigm, are then people with problems and people as problems. The example here is, so if a child is stealing something, the problem is with the child. And the normal thing that you will often hear is that not all poor children steal. But why did this particular poor child steal? You have to understand that he is not stealing because he is poor. He may be stealing because he may be an orphan, he may be a destitute, or there may be a pertinent need in the family situation. And of course, if you go back to a whole lot of 1950s, 1960s Hindi movies, you will see poverty has been picturized in all the real film or visual media, and how poverty has been viewed differently by these different mediums would help you understand. So move from the present day Hindi movies, go to the old movies, and you will see how poverty is differently understood even in visual media. The explanation and assessment, thus, if the problem is with the individual, the explanation is obviously to correct the malfunctioning that exists in the individual. So it's almost like a doctor-patient relationship. I go to the doctor will prescribe a medicine and it gets corrected. Whatever is the problem, whatever is the malady, it will get corrected. So here the client will come to the practitioner will tell the client that this is your problem and you need to correct this. So the practitioner is seeking an objective account of what is causing the problem behavior, and they will diagnose the problem. And once the diagnosis is made, there is a process of treatment, and this treatment is the ownership of the person or the client to ensure that he or she adjusts back to the society. So the aims is what? Can you think about it? Quickly think about it. Take 2 seconds. Okay, let me just demystify this for you. Here, the aims of social work practice is to recover the individual, to restore him back to the social system and ensure that the healthy and the harmonious way of functioning for the society continues. So here the individual adjusts to the society will not adjust to the individual, and hence the deviant child will be seen as an individual whose family is not so problematic. The individual is problematic, and by any chance under this paradigm they find the family problematic, the family will be individually dealt with. Family as a whole may or may not be dealt with, and hence it becomes very important for you to understand that the practice here is emphasizing upon socialization of the individual towards socially approved behavioral norms. Thus the paradigm aims to restore, improve and maintain the social system to prevent the breakdown of the system. So the methods is to help the individual, to help the person restore himself amicably to the social environment. So I, as a social worker, would be an expert then, and I would identify the fault, I would apply my objective knowledge and expertise to fix it, and hence the fixer's notion. It is assumed that the social worker would know how people work, and hence I am in a position as a social worker to explain the causes behind your problem. So it gives me a sense of power over you to understand why you are defaulting or why you are deviating from the social norms. So I attempt as a social worker to facilitate improvement in a system by improving communication with you, mediating between two parties, and giving you solutions which you have to align to. So here we are treating people, and treating people aligns very closely to two dominant modes of practice within social work, that is psychoanalytical school of social work and the behavioral practice of social work. And I'll briefly tell you about these two, but you definitely have to go back and read more about them. The psychoanalytic tradition of social work is the first school of social work which was talked about, which was taught, and which is seen as the cornerstone of our profession as well. So it's the historical relevance of the school that is very, very important, and it also gave us one very important notion that individual is important. Now interestingly, they're talking about individuals, but they're talking about individuals as scientific beings, whereas later on when you talk about radical structuralism, they talk about individuals as social beings. So individuals are very important, but how individuals are being looked at in each of the quadrants becomes important decisions for us as to how practice is aligned. So within psychoanalysis, we looked at people who had problems. So I'm sure if some of you are familiar with psychology, Freud is one name which is fairly common. There are many more psychoanalysts, but I'm using Freud here because most people seem to know him. And his key concepts were based upon what people talked about. So the notions of id, ego, superego, he talked about defense mechanisms, he talked about depressions, and when these concepts were aligned to social work practice, it led to a therapeutic relationship with the client, and hence the forerunner of our practices in terms of psychiatric hospitals and child guidance clinics stem from here. And if you realize, if you go back to the various schools of social work or the departments of social work, medical and psychiatric social work, if you realize, are the first departments of social work, and hence fixes paradigms in that sense is very important. And another important thing here is that individuals are important, come what may. Now practice here is concerned with how internal processes such as my needs, my drives, my emotions are motivating my human behavior, and how my emotions play a very central role in human behavior. Another important tenet is unconscious. How does the consciousness and unconsciousness drive my behavior? How does it motivate me? And how do my early childhood experiences lead me to behave in a particular fashion? Now this notion, if you see, currently is back in practice when we are talking about child sexual abuse. So how my experience or how one's experience of child sexual abuse tends to dominate my relationship building later on in life, that is at teenage level, or when you are about to take a step towards concretizing a certain relationship, or how you look at different people who come from the same subset of society who was an abuser for that particular person. And thus this school of practice is very important in certain crisis therapeutic conditions. Here you define the problem with the diagnosis. The aim is to help them the aim is to help your client to become emotionally mature, socially relevant, and methods are largely around clinical practice, and hence a large amount of it can be seen in casework and group work, the two methods which are taught to you in social work. It has to be reiterated that this school has been the starting point for social work profession. Many of our colleagues, many of the professionals tend to talk about the limited approach of this field, but while it has its limitations, it also has its use. And in a given context, as we've already said, social work is a practice which defines itself according to the context. So if you're talking about people who've undergone individual experiences of abuse, this school of social work is very, very important, and hence ensure that you have some skills subset which will help you deal with such problems. The next school that we're going to talk about is the behavioral social work. Again, this aligns itself strongly to the school of to the discipline of psychology, and this is also it started parallelly towards the end of psychoanalysis, and it's been practiced for nearly 40 years. Here, when I'm talking about 40 years, I'm not just talking about Indian history of social work, but I'm talking about the Western history of social work also. And it was seen that while psychoanalysis talked about individual issues, behavioral social work helped you to understand issues of a family unit, of a community, and some social issues as well. So the behavioral social work has talked about the importance of person and environment perspective. That is, the idea that treatment needs to address environmental issues as well, because the environment impacts my behavior and my behavior is responding to the environment that is outside, which could be both positive and negative. So it talks about understanding where the client is. It does talk about individualized assessment and treatment, but it also talks about how that environment needs to be modified a bit, or the environment and person need to be connected to be able to come to a solution. So behavior methods within the behavioral social work were seen to be useful to address marital difficulties, child issues, teenage pregnancy, smoking behavior, obsessive compulsive disorders, and issues relating to the elderly. Since this paradigm of practice was helping deal with issues of drug and alcohol abuse and parenting difficulties, it seemed to be addressing the changing social order that is there. Now, if you look at the time frame when this social work practice emerged, that is primarily from the late 1950s onwards, you would see that the social economic change in the world was also moving from a joint family to a nuclear family. So this paradigm practice was being able to address that external environment, and hence it got a lot of importance. So it talks about the antecedents and consequences present in the individual's environment, the learned associations he or she has acquired through these previous experiences. It suggests that human behavior is learned as individuals interact with their environment, and the behavior is maintained by positive or negative reinforcement. So as I've talked about negative and positive reinforcement, one of the most well-known therapies in this field is the cognitive behavioral therapy. The practice here is emphasizing upon changing dysfunctional thoughts which influence behavior. So when I go to the therapist, he or she will help me understand that what is it that it's disturbing me and how do I change it. So it would, if I go to the therapist and I say, I don't feel like studying in class. Now the therapist will not say, now let's understand what wrong your teacher is doing. Maybe I'm not a good teacher and I'm not catching your attention. But no, the therapist will not address me. He or she will address you. So he will help me understand that how can I concentrate in class? What is it that I can do to ensure that whatever is happening negatively in class does not disengage me from the class? So the methods which stem from this theory are the gradual shaping of new behavior through positive and negative reinforcement, modeling, stress management, biofeedback, relaxation techniques, cognitive restructuring, imagery, and systematic desensitization. So maybe through this therapy they will say that, okay, if this module teacher is very boring, don't look at her and get bored. Try to read into the messages that the module teacher is giving. So this method is helpful in understanding certain context relevant problems of an individual. So here again, if you go back to child labor, while there are a lot of practitioners who will say that if child labor is potentially damaging to the child, why does the child keep going back to child labor? And the answer, according to the behavioral social work, is that the positive reinforcement of getting a few rupees at the end of it, which helps him or her deal with the hunger not only for him or his family, is a positive reinforcement to be able to ensure that he or she goes back to child labor. And hence the non-tangible benefits of education over the tangible benefits of that small amount of money seems to take precedence, and hence behavioral social work helps you understand that how that small child is responding to a seemingly positive reinforcement which has got a lot of negative outcomes. So Howe states that behavioral social work demands its practitioners to be purposeful, methodological, organized as well as scientific, concrete and explicit. It focuses both on process and knowledge as well as on practice. Thus, problems are defined concretely, goals are set for a mutually agreed upon situation, and it is mutually agreed by the client and the change agent, and it is attempted in small sequential patterns. So you won't see a radical change in the person, say in a manner of a month, but over a period of time, the client will adjust sequentially to the small changes, and over a period of time, you will see that the change is pretty much huge for the client system. So in this, students, we have largely in this module understood what is the Fixer's approach to social work and how it is a task-centered and person and environment paradigm. We have talked about the psychoanalytical and the behavioral approaches within social work and how they locate the problem within the individual, and how behavioral social work does contextualize the environmental circumstances in the certain behavioral problems that the person exhibits. So while psychoanalytical traditions focus is on the internal and the reported problems, the behaviorists take cognizance of the external and the observable. But both are focused and both are attempting to be scientific in their application, but they both fail to question inequality, questions of injustice and power, which is beyond the individual. So it is important to understand the context of practice of these professional practice paradigms, but the dialectics of practice today, it forces us to say that while these can be the starting point, the end of our social work profession is in questioning injustice. So the importance of this practice paradigm is that it has helped give social work its own identity, and in the initial days, if you see Mary Richmond and the various forerunners of social work, they have used these practice paradigms to give us a distinct identity. And though they have given us a lot of credibility and their application has given us a social purpose, it is important for us to understand that we have to align these practice perspectives to the emerging context of inequality that we are seemingly every day engaging with. So this module has traced the close relationship between psychoanalysis and behaviorism with social work until the 1960s, when societies turned its attention to the macro system intervention and other theoretical frameworks and practice models. These practice models tended to take a backseat. But this practice is emphasized on direct practice, which is very important in today's time. These paradigms have helped us to understand the profession's professional approach for its own distinctive identity. And thus it has contributed a lot to both our professionalism and social work education. If we understand the practice within this paradigm, the individual becomes a cornerstone of your practice, and the circumstances in which that individual is, the beginnings of that tradition have evolved in this paradigm. And while it is an objective approach, it has led, because the critique of this paradigm has led us to understand the subjective dimensions of practice. And it becomes important for us to say that objective is not totally irrelevant. Maybe it becomes important to attract attention based on this objectivity, but subjectivity becomes important to dislodge that very beginning of the problem. And there are some individuals who would prefer this paradigm of practice over our radical humanists or radical structuralists, and thus what your client wants defines this. And this paradigm for all social work students is important, because they have to understand that the history of practice and the importance of our identity lies in this paradigm. So to be able to understand this module, I would say very clearly David Howell's book, which is written in 1960s, is very important, because he talks extensively about psychoanalysis and behavioral social work. Once you read that book, then you can, there are a lot of readings given in the e-text. You can please access those. Some of them are available on the internet. Access them, and I'm sure it will be clear to you what this paradigm is all about.